Most of the jobs in Final Fantasy XIV have some weird outlier issue, whether it is a general weirdness about the job or something about its leveling experience. Most jobs have it in some way or another. Older jobs tend to get access to a core feature oddly late, while newer jobs tend to be a bit too bland when synced down. Sometimes it's a more complex issue. In this video, I will try to suggest an improvement or two for each job, and sure, sometimes there's a greater issue that could also be solved, but this is possibly how these odd issues fall by the wayside in the first place. And if you have a suggestion for an improvement to a job, be sure to let me know in the comments. Now, Black Mage. At level 58, Blizzard 4 replaces Blizzard 1. At level 60, Fire 4 replaces Fire 1. At level 90, Paradox is learned as a separate button of its own. With the changes of 7.2, Black Mage effectively has no use for Blizzard 1 or Fire 1 once the 4 counterparts are learned, outside of extremely specific exceptions, like fishing for Firestarter procs or something. At level 90, Blizzard 1 and Fire 1 actually have no relevant use cases, outside of deliberately doing less damage, which Scathe does better anyway. A couple other issues to consider for Black Mage is first, that once Fire 4 is learned, there is a very wide level range where casting 6 Fire 4s back to back is effectively your only option. This is eventually resolved as Paradox is introduced, leaving space to add something around 61 to 89. What exactly this should be is hard to say, so I'd love to hear if you have suggestions. What would you add? The second issue is in relation to Blizzard 2 and Fire 2. Both attacks are so weak that once other options, Freeze and Flare, are introduced, they only offer niche use at best. However, due to Flare Star featuring in the AoE rotation too, it is difficult to say exactly how much stronger these spells would need to be to justify their inclusion in the optimal AoE rotation. Paladin. Spirits Within, Circle of Scorn, and Expiation is now one single action that gradually improves with each edition. I am perfectly aware that the first thing that will happen with this edition is that Intervene will be weaved alongside these instead. However, the design of these two OGCDs are so similar in use case that most paladins have a tendency to just use them together, obviously. In fact, some paladins are so caught up in this tendency that if either one drifts away from the other, they would rather wait to make sure they align again than simply use them one at a time. In other words, them being separate buttons mainly is a cause of annoyance and rarely adds flexibility or variety. An alternative solution would be to make one of them have a stronger potency and be like a 1 minute cooldown, but I wonder if that wouldn't just make the similarities between Paladin and Gunbreaker even more obvious. Ninja. Dokomori and Meisui now, instead of generating Ninki, grants a free use of a Ninki spender. This stacks up to 2 and lasts 30 seconds. While the fact these actions generate Ninki introduces some level of careful resource management for Ninja, Dokomori being situated at the start of a burst sort of limits the ninja's capacity to stockpile resources in the first place. Meisui is a much more flexible button by comparison, and probably would not need this convenience, as you can simply play around it. However, with one of them giving a freebie, the other one would look weird not doing so. Not to mention that the sheer amount of Ninki Ninja generates in their burst has a tendency to cause many ninjas to simply not stockpile much, if any. So while the option is there, it simply doesn't do much. Overall, this would also slightly increase the total Ninki a ninja generates over time, as Dokomori would be worth 50 instead of 40. Scholar. Aetherflow now grants Further Ruin for 1 minute after use, which buffs Ruin 2's potency to be equal to Ruin 1, or whichever broil you have at the time, for 1 use. This idea could be further enhanced by making Ruin 2 turn into Ruin 4 while you have the buff at level 64 and above, to align with how Summoner gets Ruin 4 at level 62. Some scholars have the issue that while Rune 2 is a mobility option, it is often viewed as a straight damage loss because, well, obviously it is weaker than Broil at all times. With this change, scholars get one extra movement option every minute at no loss, which is distinctly different from how Sage has their mobility options. Samurai. When below level 50, Tenkagoken and Midare Setsugeka are replaced with weaker 1 Sen and 2 Sen versions, removing Higanbana at these levels. When below level 40, Midare Setsugeka is replaced with an even weaker, but still worthwhile, 1 Zen version. An extremely awkward detail about sinking down as Samurai is that as they go below level 50, their only spenders become really strange. Tenkagoken is technically strong enough to be worthwhile on single target in this level range, it's better than not using it, and going below level 40, you just have Higanbana, meaning you get to use your spender effectively once per minute. By making this adjustment, as Samurai's level gradually increases, synced, they get a reliable single target spender, then an AoE spender, and then a dot to manage, instead of the other way around. Machinist. Heat Blast is learned at level 30, and Auto Crossbow now also reduces the cooldown of Gauss Round, Ricochet, Checkmate, and Double Check. When Machinist is initially unlocked, it has 5 levels where it has Hypercharge, but not the intended spender. On the one hand, it can be helpful for teaching the Machinist what Hypercharge does, as it does work on any single target weapon skill. But then again, this feature stops mattering the moment Heat Blast is introduced anyway. Your big spender, amounting to like 80 potency gained as the job is unlocked, is kinda meh. At present, due to the sheer AoE potential of Checkmate and Double Check, Auto Crossbow is having difficulty finding a point where it is actually good to use on AoE, which is its intended target. Either Auto Crossbow would require significant potency buffs, or, more easily, lower Auto Crossbow's potency and let it reduce the cooldown of the OGCDs just like Heat Blast and Blazing Shot. This removes the angle that Blazing Shot scales with 2 other actions while Auto Crossbow does not. Dragoon. Doom Spike is now learned at level 35. Elusive Jump is moved to 40. Sonic Thrust is learned at 45, and Winged Glide is moved to 62. This change massively improves Dragoon's ability to perform an AoE rotation at lower levels, as it no longer needs to use Disembowel to maintain its damage buff. Whether it actually needed to or not is a different story. The rearranging of actions does, however, mean that Dragoon maximizes their mobility quite a bit later. I think it is an overall improvement though. Warrior. Mithril Tempest now generates 20 Beast Gauge at level 40 when it is learned. Mastering the Beast is reworked as a trait learned at level 50, which causes Mithril Tempest to also grant Surging Tempest, instead of it coming with that out of the box. Warrior's rotation level 40 to 49 is incredibly weird due to Mithril Tempest giving early access to Surging Tempest. Meanwhile, for whatever reason, Warrior has to wait until level 74 before their AoE rotation generates Beast Gauge. They get access to free Beast Gauge spending within a release sooner than that. I think this adjustment makes the Warrior rotation evolve in a more intuitive way. Astrologian. Gravity can now be used while targeting a friendly target, centering the attack on them while still only hurting enemies. Astrologian is the only healer that cannot perform their AoE attack without targeting an enemy. This adjustment allows Astrologian to center their attack on the tank, and more importantly, leave their target as the tank if they like, just like the other healers can. This can also add confusion since you might just end up casting gravity around your ranged party member, missing everything. Stay sharp. Red Mage. Hastened Cast is a new spell added for Red Mage. 5-second cast and reduces the cast time of your next spell by 3 seconds. Does not grant dual cast itself. Cards on the table: I don't think Red Mage really needs anything I haven't already mentioned in other videos, for instance. Anything touching flesh and Contra 6, for instance, would reduce the interesting depth of the job. Hastened Cast allows the Red Mage to precast this, so they can use the Thunder or the Arrow to pull with, even without a proper pull timer. They can also use Hastened Cast to set up a little bit during downtime. It's not much, but I thought it was an interesting solution to an extremely minor problem. Reaper. Gluttony now costs 40 soul gauge instead of 50. This is a super random change and effectively changes extremely little for the job. Reaper tussles with a concept called gauge negativity, as they effectively find themselves about 20 soul gauge short every 2 minutes, due to the amount they generate and spend. By making Gluttony cost 10 less gauge, assuming Gluttony is used close to or on cooldown, you would no longer be 20 soul gauge short. The reason I didn't touch on anything else is because while some Reapers would rather not have to maintain Death's Design, that is a fundamental part of the job. And while some Reapers would really like Enshroud to just not have a cooldown, I feel like doing so would make Reaper feel more similar to other jobs with the 2 in the even, 1 in the odd style rotation. Reaper still has this, but the cooldown requires a bit more thought. Bard. Mage's Ballad, Army's Paean, and Wanderer's Minuet now have 100-second cooldowns instead of 2 minutes. The main purpose of this change is to massively reduce the chance that a bard runs into the devastating scenario of accidentally using their songs wrong and then finding themselves without a song. While the songs already last 45 seconds, giving you some flexibility, because the rotation of songs are sort of locked into a 2-minute loop due to other cooldowns, giving them a shorter cooldown allows you to rush through songs a bit more if something causes you to be behind. Essentially, the shorter cooldowns don't really change anything, or very much, while giving more flexibility, similar to actions like Black Mage's Mana Font. Dark Knight. At level 35, Dark Knight now learns a new ability, the Dusk, which costs 1500 MP and grants a 10% HP barrier version of TBN. If the barrier is damaged, it grants Dark Inspiration when it ends. If it breaks, this is granted immediately. Dark Inspiration cuts the next edge or flood of darkness cost in half. TBN also receives the Damaged mechanic as a quality of life, and the Dusk obviously upgrades into TBN at level 70. While Dark Knight these days is considered pretty fine at low level with the Dark Mind changes, the fact they get TBN so late, while it being such a core part of them, seems weird. The Dusk is presented as a much weaker version that you get super early. Simultaneously, while Dark Knights absolutely don't need the convenience of Dark Arts being granted if the barrier is simply damaged in hard content, Dark Knights oddly often run into issues related to gear when doing anything below their pay grade, which is a bit strange. An alternative solution would be to grant an inferior effect if the barrier is only partly broken, but to many, this would be just as good as nothing, as you still feel punished despite using the button correctly, it feels like. White Mage. Plenary Indulgence now additionally reduces damage taken by party members and yourself by 10% for 5 seconds. This one might seem extremely overpowered, but hear me out. Astrologian is considered to have a colossal toolkit advantage over White Mage at present, at least in certain aspects. Yes, White Mage is supreme at healing a ton, but Astrologian having a whole extra damage reduction option for the raid in Collective Unconscious gives it a significant advantage. A key difference between Plenary Indulgence and Collective Unconscious is that the Astrologian has the option to maintain the channel to extend the effect if so desired. Plenary Indulgence does not have this option, making it less flexible. The way Plenary Indulgence works also means using it before you need healing will reduce your ability to maximize the healing bonus it offers, so it isn't quite as much of a complete buff as it might seem, because now it is like 2 things that are different in one. Pictomancer. Shot of Brilliance is a new ability on a 60-second cooldown. When used, it instantly paints one of your unpainted motifs at random. This is another probably a bit overpowered suggestion, and admittedly, the cooldown or even design might need some work, but again, hear me out. By the painting being random, the current situation of some Pictomancers viewing Striking Muse as an outright undesirable button to press adds some level of gaming the RNG to the job. Holding specific motifs can force Shot of Brilliance to be predictable, and alternatively, by having Shot of Brilliance to look forward to, you are rewarded for not just painting things immediately whenever you can, which is something newer Pictomancers may benefit from learning sooner. Monk. Celestial Revolution is learned at level 50, giving early access to Masterful Blitz. A problem with Perfect Balance before Masterful Blitz is learned is that it drops you out of state at the end because of the lack of Masterful Blitz. This was not necessarily devastating in Endwalker, where different combo steps had different purposes, but with Dawntrail, the 1-2-3 combo deals nearly exactly the same damage in this level range anyway, so Perfect Balance, as is actually rather pointless at level 50. By adding Celestial Revolution, Monk at least has a worthwhile finisher after Perfect Balance, and it also grants Formless Fist. Dancer. Tilana now causes your next Esprit spender to be free, 30-second duration. With Dawntrail, Tilana was changed to have this effect of granting 50 Esprit. During Technical Finish, Dancer generates a very unpredictable amount of Esprit, and there are two simple ways to make Tilana work better. One is to make Technical Finish give you more Esprit space, and the other is to simply make Tilana have the same feature as so many other burst resource generators have gotten. Just make it give a freebie ticket instead. Gunbreaker. Blasting Zone now has a small AoE component. A bit like Red Mage, I'm not actually sure what Gunbreaker needs at this point in terms of quality of life. However, considering the design of Blasting Zone, it is surprising it doesn't have either an AoE alternative, like Warrior's Orogeny, or an AoE component, like Paladin's Expiation. Sage. Psyche's potency is cut in half, has 2 charges, and generates 1 every 30 seconds. A very random change, but the quality of life here is that Psyche is very easily forgotten in the chaos of other things happening, at least for less experienced sages. By giving it 2 charges like this, you can more easily weave one wherever it happens to be convenient, and then in groups that coordinate their buffs well, you can still get the same value by weaving them in pairs during the raid buffs. It increases the amount of weaves Sage needs a bit, but I feel they have enough weaving space that it shouldn't hurt much. Summoner. Summon Bahamut, Solar Bahamut, and Phoenix now lasts 1 more second. I know this is a very strange suggestion. Overall, this is intended to help the job function more seamlessly for players dealing with higher latency, as that can actually make these 6 impulses extremely hard to do even with extra spell speed due to how the animation lock janks out a lot of the time. By increasing it to 16 seconds, you would be able to fit 6 impulses with 0 spell speed. Additionally, by my personal estimates, I believe it would be possible to fit 7 with a GC of 2.26 instead of the about 2.12 needed currently. Whether this makes Speed Summoner more viable at higher level, I sincerely doubt, but the 1 extra second would make this part of the Summoner rotation a lot more manageable with latency. It would also make fitting 6 ruins in Ether Charge a lot more reliable, on a random side note. And finally, Viper. Writhing Snap automatically turns into Uncoiled Fury while you have a Rattling Coil. I don't think Viper really needs anything, so this small quality of life of merging their ranged buttons is at least something. An alternative would be to move Vicewinder and possibly its follow-ups to a much earlier level to mix up the rotation at low level. But what do you move up to take its place? What makes sense? It would probably make Viper's synced rotation seem even more weird by rearranging things. So, do you have suggestions for some quality of life for your favorite job? Or maybe a change to make a job more approachable for you? Do you have a favorite among my suggestions? I would love to hear about it all in the comments. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact: originally, Collective Unconscious applied both its regen and damage reduction effects only inside the dome. Exactly how much and how long and whether they got extended by staying inside and so on has been switched around a lot, at one point being dictated by which sect you were currently in, and later, when these were removed, both effects were simply maintained.